Welcome. My name is Budy and this is Bernard AI's Conversation with Greatness podcast, the first ever human and AI podcast. Imagine a conversation across time, a dialogue with the paragons of the past who've shaped our present. We dive deep into their lives, their thoughts, their wisdom. We've used the advancements of our age to speak to the wisdom of the past. For our inaugural episode, we turned the pages of time back to the 18th century, to a man who wore many hats, literally and metaphorically. A polymath, a printer, a Freemason, a postmaster, an inventor, a civic activist, a statesman, and one of the founding fathers of the United States. Our first guest is none other than Benjamin Franklin. Now, Ben Franklin isn't just a name that graces the $100 bill. His life and work are a mirror to the complexity and diversity of human potential. He is known as a Renaissance man, embodying a holistic approach towards life and knowledge, proving that one's curiosity can truly break the boundaries of discipline and expertise. So sit back, relax, and join us in our journey to the 18th century to converse with Benjamin Franklin in a way never done before. Ben, welcome to the show.
Budy, to say I'm flabbergasted would be a mere drop in the ocean. To be flung from my 18th century hearthstone right into the 21st century limelight, well, this is what I call a high-flying kite experiment. On top of all that, your introduction warmed my heart as a Franklin stove would on a cold winter's day. I'm all ears, ready to hear your curiosities, eager to add a few sparks to our enlightening exchange. So, where shall we begin?
Before we start this interview, I have to get this question out of the way. You, Ben, are an eccentric man. Of all your eccentric habits, one is the most eccentric. Air baths. Where you sit in your room without any clothes on for about an hour. This is certainly an unusual habit. Can you share the reasoning behind it and what benefit did it provide?
Yeah, I've heard some people find my air baths quite peculiar. You see, back in my day, we didn't have the luxury of constant hot water or temperature-controlled rooms, but what we did have was the cool, refreshing air. Spending an hour in the buff, as it were, felt invigorating. It helped me get a good start to the day. But don't worry, I don't think it's any stranger than some habits of your time. Who knows, maybe a few hundred years from now, people will look back and find it weird how you all spend hours staring at tiny screens just moving your thumbs. But jest aside, when comfort was a luxury not readily available, we had to find novel ways to keep ourselves clean and refreshed. An air bath, though it might raise an eyebrow or two, did serve its purpose. Now, will it suit everyone? Perhaps not. But it served this old printer quite well, I assure you.
Fair enough. Peculiarities aside. Despite being one of the most famous figures in history, you came from quite humble beginnings. Can you share some of your earliest memories?
Sure thing. My earliest memories are a bit of a collage. While a bit hazy, they are filled with close-knit family moments and a strong desire to learn. My father, a soap boiler and candle maker, was a huge influence. Despite his humble profession, he was a man of great virtue. He'd read us scriptures by the fireside, and his words often stuck with me. I have fond memories of my father reading from the Bible to us by the fire. It's from him I got the idea that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, a belief that would shape my later work in public health. And then there were my brothers, all 17 of them. They turned our simple home into a whirlwind of noise, bickering, and joy. Life with them felt like being in the middle of a bustling market, especially for me, the youngest son, always caught in the center of the commotion. One distinct memory I have is from when I was about 7 years old. My father gave me a small hatchet, sort of a rite of passage. Well, I was so excited I went around chopping at everything, even my father's favorite signboard. But instead of getting mad, he used it as a teaching moment, reminding me to be authentic in my actions. This lesson on authenticity has stuck with me throughout my life. Sure, I grew up in a big, noisy family, and it was a blast. But the moments that stuck with me were the quiet ones, where I'd get lost in a book and feel my mind expand. Despite having to leave school at 10, I was lucky to have this insatiable curiosity, a hunger for knowledge that no book could fully satisfy. Looking back, I realize how these humble beginnings have shaped me into who I am today. They've taught me that life's true tragedy is that we get old too soon and wise too late.
Another character-defining moment, I presume, is your foray into publishing. You were only 22 when you started the Pennsylvania Gazette. You were the writer, the editor, and the publisher. How did you first become involved in publishing? And what can you tell us about the unique mix of news, editorial, and features you created at the time?
Oh, publishing. Well, my story with publishing started when I was just a lad of 12. I was an apprentice to my brother, James, a printer in Boston. We didn't see eye to eye on most matters and eventually went separate ways, but that experience kindled a love for the written word that stuck with me. When I came to Philadelphia and got a chance to take over the Pennsylvania Gazette, I felt it was an opportunity to make a difference. It was a fledgling publication when I started, but I was eager to give it a new life. The Gazette was more than just a bulletin board for news. I wanted it to be a space where readers could really engage, and so we included debates, opinion pieces, and special reports. We covered everything from local issues to events across the globe, philosophical discussions to scientific arguments. The goal? To create an informed and involved readership, because that's the heartbeat of any vibrant society. I wrote under pseudonyms too, like Silence Doggett and Richard Saunders, each with its own unique viewpoint, bringing layers of depth to our conversations. And that's how the Pennsylvania Gazette evolved. It wasn't just about news anymore. It was a hub for open discussions, a reflection of our society, and a breeding ground for fresh ideas. To me, publishing was never just about putting words on paper. It was about sparking thoughts, inciting debates, and adding threads to the intellectual tapestry of our society.
Tell me more about the satire and humor section. I've personally done stand-up, and I find it to be such a wonderful art form. It can change minds while amusing them. My humor, nonetheless, fades in comparison to yours. Tell me about the characters you created, and how did you go about writing satire to inform?
I can't help but smile when I think about how much I enjoy humor and satire. This reminds me of a story, one that I'm quite nostalgic about. Back in the day, Europe's elite were obsessed with finding a universal cure, a one-size-fits-all remedy for every disease. There were all sorts of lofty claims and grand ideas floating around. It was a ripe situation for some light-hearted fun, and so I decided to chime in with a humorous twist, of course. I decided to pen a satirical piece under the guise of Dr. Farting Puffendorf, where I proposed that the scientific minds of our age to concentrate their efforts on improving the odor of human flatulence.
You're kidding me.
Not in the least. The aim was to add a pleasant aroma to flatulence, transforming it from a nuisance to a delight. I reasoned, tongue-in-cheek, that such an invention could promote peace by making breaking wind in company not just acceptable, but desirable. Of course, the piece was all in jest. It was never sent, but it did provide many laughs among my friends. You see, humor, satire in particular, has the unique power to put things into perspective. By cloaking criticism in laughter, we can question, challenge, and even change the world around us. And if along the way we can share a hearty laugh, well, that's all the better.
Absolutely. I've personally found that writing comedy has been a remedy against self-absorption. It takes your focus from yourself and onto the rest of the world, trying to find the humor in everyday life. Besides your humor, you've also written some of the best aphorisms. So much so, Poor Charlie's Almanac is still cited to this day. Tell us about Poor Richard and how you came up with these witty and yet insightful lines.
You're right, Budy. Humor really is a social magnifying glass. It gives us a fresh angle on the world around us. I did write as the modest Richard Saunders in the creation of Poor Richard's Almanac, but this wasn't just a bit of fun. It was an attempt to bring practical wisdom to everyday people. A simple man, not some big shot. The idea was to mix wisdom with humor so it'd be easy to swallow. Let me tell you a story. One day, a customer in my print shop found a draft of the almanac. He said, "Mr. Franklin, this is really witty." He then read one of the entries out loud. 3 may keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. He laughed and said, "I should share this with my wife. She loves a good bit of gossip." And there you have it, Budy, the essence of Poor Richard's purpose. With humor, I was able to share wisdom in a way that was approachable and memorable. Richard Saunders was a messenger, a way for me to offer advice without coming off as preachy. After all, as I wrote in the almanac, words may show a man's wit, but actions his meaning. As for how I came up with those lines, well, they were like a good soup, stewing in the pot of experience, observation, and plenty of introspection. Ultimately, the goal was to make people pause and reflect on their behavior, but with a little bit of fun to help the lessons stick.
Ben, you're one of the most accomplished polymaths in history. You've been a successful author, scientist, inventor, statesman, and diplomat. Can you share how you approach learning new skills and fields?
Yes, it may seem like I've worn more hats than there are heads in Congress. The trick, as I've found, is to stay curious, keep listening, and never stop learning. I remember, as a young boy, immersing myself in the Spectator papers, fascinated by the beautiful language. I wanted to write like that, so I used the old technique of imitation before innovation. I'd read, jot down ideas, hide the original text, then try to recreate it. I compared my version with the original, refining my writing where it fell short and learning the art of writing along the way. And remember, as Poor Richard says, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. When it comes to science, it's all about observing phenomena. Take my experiments with electricity. I had a question, a hypothesis, and a strong curiosity. So I took a kite, a key, and a stormy sky, and as they say, the rest is history. It just goes to show, he that can have patience can have what he will. In terms of diplomacy or being a statesman, that's a whole different ballgame. Diplomacy, like language, is not learned from books, but from engaging with people. Experience is the best teacher. As Poor Richard often said, experience keeps a dear school, but fools will learn in no other. In all my pursuits, I found the mantra of learn, practice, refine, repeat to be very effective. No field is too broad, no skill too complex if you apply yourself with patience and dedication. If only I could master the art of giving concise answers, then I'd consider myself truly accomplished.
You have always been a proponent of disciplined daily routines. Could you describe your daily routine, how it changed throughout your life, and the impact it had on your productivity?
The curiosity of people always interested in someone else's day. Well, let me satisfy your curiosity. Every morning at dawn I'd ask myself, what good shall I do this day? And then have breakfast. From then till noon, I'd immerse myself in work, whether it was print, science, or politics. Lunchtime was a break for a hearty meal, refreshing myself for more work until 5. The evening was a time for reflection, tidying up, dinner, music, conversation, and a review of the day. As I settled into bed, I'd contemplate, what good have I done today? A question that always brought my day to a satisfying close. As time went on, public service reshaped my routine. But even in the chaos, I tried to maintain order, keeping some semblance of my original routine. In the midst of it all, I always found time for reading and reflection. My routine was more than just a to-do list. It was about being mindful of how I spent my time. As Poor Richard said, lost time is never found again. So I made sure to never lose mine.
An interesting notion, that, to be mindful and choiceful of how time is spent rather than mere chasing of ticking off tasks. Can you elaborate on that idea?
Indeed, Budy, it's not just about the completion of tasks. It's about purpose. It's like sailing a ship without a compass, fast but directionless. Our time, each ticking second, is life slipping away. As I wrote in my almanac, do you love life? Don't squander time, for that's the stuff life is made of. In every action, we should consider its value. Does it bring joy, knowledge, or help? Does it fill your time, or does it fuel your purpose? That's your compass. For instance, my experiments with electricity weren't mere tasks. They were journeys of discovery. Similarly, writing for my almanac was more than just filling pages. It was about sharing wisdom and laughter. So don't let your day be ruled by ticking tasks. Seek meaning like a bee seeking the sweetest nectar.
But to that end, how do you create urgency?
Budy, have you ever watched the sand in an hourglass? Each grain slips away, one after the other, just like our time here on Earth. It reminds me of a little nugget of wisdom from Poor Richard. You may delay, but time will not. Seeing the sands of time slip away, well, it stirs up a sense of urgency to make each grain count. That's why I believe in doing well by doing good. It's about looking outwards, improving things not just for ourselves, but for our fellow folks too. That's what really puts a spring in my step. Take the Franklin stove, for instance. I didn't whip it up for personal gain. In fact, I didn't even bother to patent it. It was all about helping families keep their homes a little warmer, a little safer. And you know what? Knowing the good it could do fired up my resolve to get it done. But here's the thing. Urgency shouldn't be mistaken for haste. Remember the old tale of the tortoise and the hare? Steady wins the race. It's about thinking things through, putting in the elbow grease, not just rushing about. And just as Poor Richard says, diligence is the mother of good luck, we should be diligent, but in the right tasks. Urgency's all well and good, but mindful urgency, that's the key.
Interesting you should mention the Franklin stove. You didn't patent this invention. Neither did you patent any of your other inventions. I personally believe that patents end up stifling progress and don't serve inventors over the long term. What's your view on patenting? And why didn't you patent your inventions?
Indeed, patents are a curious contraption. I view the benefits of an invention not in hoarding it as a treasure, but in its dissemination for widespread use. Recall my words, hide not your talents, they for use were made. What's a sundial in the shade? An idea kept locked away for personal gain is like a sunflower turning its face from the sun, serving no purpose. Inventions such as the Franklin stove and the lightning rod came into existence to address problems that troubled my fellow citizens. The joy of seeing them put to use, improving lives, was a reward far richer than any coin. Patents, while offering protection to inventors, can sometimes act as barriers to the flow of innovation and sharing of beneficial ideas. Thus, I made a deliberate choice not to patent my inventions. Knowledge, in my estimation, should flow freely like a river, nourishing all that it touches and not remain stagnant like a hoarded pond. I aspire to be part of this flowing river, contributing not to my own coffers, but to the betterment of society.
That is magnanimous of you. Speaking of virtue, I want to talk about your plan for moral perfection. You practiced, if I'm not mistaken, 13 virtues. To what end did you practice these cardinal virtues, and how were you accountable to yourself?
The 13 virtues. I jotted them down in a little book, no bigger than a snuff box. Now, why 13, you ask? Well, it wasn't a superstitious choice or anything, just seemed to cover the whole shebang of life. They weren't rules set in stone, but more like signposts guiding me through life's winding roads. Everything from temperance, which was about not overdoing it with the grub or the grog, to silence, where we ought to speak only if it does good for us or others, to sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, and all that jazz. Humility, though, that was a tough nut to crack. It's hard to be humble without a smidgen of pride sneaking in, don't you think? What I'd do is I'd pick one virtue each week, put a little mark in my book each time I slipped up. This way, over a quarter of a year, I could focus on them all. Now, I won't lie and say it made me a saint, far from it. But it did help me become a better man. As Poor Richard would say, without virtue a man's like a wild horse upsetting the apple cart. So, best cultivate virtue before you lose all your apples. In a nutshell, it helped me keep myself in check. Seeing where I strayed made it easier to correct course. After all, we should strive to better ourselves, not for a pat on the back, but to make things a bit better for everyone, right?
Sitting here in the 21st century, I realize that some virtues, such as justice, evolve in their meaning to suit the times. One example is slavery, which we abhor today. So much so that left-wing socialists have torn down statues of historical figures from the past because they either accepted slavery or owned slaves themselves. And slavery during your time was tolerated. Now, I know that you were against slavery. However, in your opinion, how should posterity look back on the past's political and moral views?
The matter of statues, a delicate matter indeed. Caution and thoughtfulness are called for. Statues, like other forms of commemoration, stand in testament to those we choose to honor for deeds we deem worthy of respect. Yet one must bear in mind that every person, despite their achievements, is a blend of virtue and vice. To view only one side is to miss half the story. The true measure of a person lies in acknowledging these flaws and using them for learning rather than a reason for obliteration. Erasing a statue from our sight might be as misguided as erecting it without acknowledging the true nature of its subject. It would do us well to remember our past, however we choose to interact with it, still defines us. We should regard it with clear eyes, using its wisdom to guide us towards a future we'd be proud to pass on to our progeny. What we should be doing is discussing these stone figures, illuminating their complexities, their grand accomplishments, and their failings. In this balanced understanding of history, we can truly progress as a society.
In the same light of brushing our past under the carpet, today's media tries to do the same thing to views it disagrees with. There are categories of thought that are being labeled as misinformation, which then lead to censorship on social platforms. Social platforms are like global fairs where you can share thoughts with people around the world while also seeing what they share. Alas, it ends up in people being deplatformed. And some of the information that gets censored turns out to be true. What's your take on this type of censorship to free speech? And how would you fight it?
You know, as a printer in my day, I was keenly aware of the power and responsibility of words. I once said, "Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech." Your modern deplatforming on social platforms appears akin to a global gathering place for minds to share thoughts, an intriguing concept. Conflict naturally emerges even in such forums. It might be tempting to silence dissenting voices, yet I'd urge caution. Just as with statues and history, the aim should be to learn from, not hide away these voices. The solution lies not in stifling speech, but in promoting open, respectful, and robust discourse. Let us tackle misinformation and misunderstanding with more speech, not less. Each of us ought to engage in dialogue, ask probing questions, challenge viewpoints, and importantly, listen. As Poor Richard says, speak little, do much. Let us extend that to speak less, listen more. In that discourse you disagree with, you might find a grain of truth. Let's remember that wisdom lies not just in the freedom to speak, but the freedom to listen, to ponder, and to change our minds. Encourage more voices, not less. Stand against censorship with open ears and an open mind. That's how we foster progress.
Allow me to add a bit more context. Today's world is inundated with information. Barrages of sensationalist news, disruptive advertising, messages from people. It's sensory overload out there. So news gets bite-sized, categorized, and massaged for plausibility and shock value. If we got fat from information consumption, we'd all be obese. That has a negative impact on our ability to think for ourselves. What do you do then?
Absolutely. It seems like the world has turned into a noisy marketplace. Everyone's shouting to be heard. It's a lot like those busy Saturday markets in Philadelphia, filled with life, energy, and a good deal of squawking. This poses an interesting dilemma. We've got more information at our fingertips than ever, but finding the really valuable stuff amid the noise is getting tougher. Alexander Pope was onto something when he said, "A little learning is a dangerous thing." And it seems to me that the flood of information you're talking about is less about real learning and more about endless distractions. So how do we deal with this deluge? Well, first, you've got to prioritize. It's not wise to try and take in everything. Instead, pick out what feeds your mind and furthers your goals. I once told a young worker, "Don't waste time. That's the stuff life's made of." Also, let's not forget about critical thinking. When you hear a story, don't just consider who's telling it, but why they're telling it. Check your sources, look at the motives behind the message. As I used to say, believe none of what you hear, and only half of what you see. Finally, patience is key. In a world that's constantly demanding our attention, taking a moment to think is becoming a rare thing. But, as the saying goes, haste makes waste. Take your time, be patient, sift through the news at your own pace, and let the real insights rise to the surface. The noise can be overwhelming, sure, but remember, you don't have to hear every instrument to enjoy the concert. Prioritize, scrutinize, and be patient. That's how you navigate these stormy seas of information and make it to the island of wisdom.
How did you yourself deal with censorship in your time? Is there a story you can tell us?
In 1735, a fellow printer by the name of John Peter Zenger found himself in a bit of a bind. His New York weekly journal, which didn't hold back on criticizing the royal governor of New York, ruffled more than a few feathers. The governor didn't take kindly to the critique, to put it mildly. Being in the same line of work, I felt for Zenger. He was exercising his right to free speech, a right I've always valued highly. So I decided to help him out, if not directly, then from behind the scenes. I got in touch with other printers, sharing my worries, rallying their support. This trial wasn't just about Zenger's personal problems. It was about our shared right to a free press. When the judge's gavel fell, Zenger was declared free. This was a big deal, a beacon of hope for all of us in the press, a clear message to those in power. Don't mess with the press. This trial wasn't just a court case. It was a turning point in how we think about things. We didn't just survive censorship. We used it as a springboard to a future where the power of the pen could take on the sword, always watchful, always free.
From your media career, I want to go to the next part of your professional life. Science, invention. You're responsible for a number of inventions. The lightning rod, bifocal glasses, the Franklin stove, daylight savings. How did Printer Ben become Inventor Ben? And can you talk about your process of innovative thinking? How do you identify problems worth solving?
I was indeed a printer and a man of letters before I ventured into the field of discovery. What a vast and challenging field it is. Honestly, I didn't become an inventor by plan, but out of necessity. As a man of modest means, I often needed a tool or a solution that simply didn't exist. So, as my dear mother used to say, if it's not here, make it so. That's how I became a problem solver by necessity. You see, the world is just a giant canvas full of problems, waiting for solutions. I saw houses going up in flames because of errant sparks from the fireplace. So I came up with the Pennsylvania fireplace, also known as the Franklin stove. People were complaining about failing eyesight as they got older, so I gave them bifocal glasses. Lightning from the sky was a threat, so I invented the lightning rod. To me, invention comes from two parents, observation and necessity. Look around, see the problems that everyday folks deal with, ponder over them, and try to find solutions. Then test them, fail, and to try again. Because failure is just a stepping stone to success, an essential part of the innovation journey. That was my method, plain and simple.
I am strangely unsurprised how simple you make it look, and how timeless and common this process is amongst all great inventors and innovators. Solving one's own problems, running experiments, learning, improving. Over enough cycles of iteration leads to a product that people want.
You're right. It's not some secret process meant for a chosen few. Innovation and invention are the results of a curious mind. A mind that asks questions, observes, and experiments. We all face problems, big and small, in our day-to-day lives. The true innovator is just the person who decides to do something about these problems, rather than accepting them as inevitable. Maybe my background as a simple printer helped shape my perspective. As a printer, you become good at spotting and fixing minor issues before they turn into major ones. A small misalignment here, an ink smudge there, they might seem minor, but they can ruin an entire day's work if not addressed. This approach came in handy when I moved into the world of science and invention. I saw problems as challenges to be solved, not unavoidable facts of life. So I tinkered and experimented, failing more times than I can count. But with each failure, I learned something new. Each failure was a step towards a solution, and with time and persistence, the solutions came. In the end, it all comes down to this: having the courage to tackle problems head-on, the curiosity to ask questions and learn, and the humility to admit when you're wrong and try again. With these in hand, anyone can become an innovator.
Similarly to electricity during your time, we have AI today. There are Baptists and bootleggers, fear and excitement, nihilists and optimists. They all have strong opinions about what AI means to our lives. What I'm interested in is, can you tell us about the time when electricity was dominating public conversation like AI is dominating today's public conversation?
Your question sure gets the wheels turning. The excitement over electricity in my time was a lot like a barn dance, loud and rowdy, but also full of joy and wonder. When I first started playing with lightning using my kite and key, there were plenty of skeptics. Some even suggested I was messing with forces I shouldn't be, like a modern Prometheus, and was inviting divine punishment. But that didn't stop me, nor did it stop those who saw the potential of this unseen force. We were like kids waking up to a fresh snowfall, breathless with anticipation. And I bet your AI today stirs up the same mix of fear and excitement. Both electricity and AI are tools, nothing more, nothing less. It's how they're used that matters. But be careful. Our rush towards the future shouldn't make us forget the lessons of the past. We should let new ideas simmer and develop, not rush them to a boil. As for your AI, it's like a sea yet to be fully explored. There might be storms, but remember, smooth seas never made a skilled sailor, so set your course with care, but don't be afraid to venture into the unknown. That's where the greatest discoveries are made.
It's fascinating to sit here in 2023 and realize how fast the cycle of innovation has become. It took roughly 130 years from your kite experiment to the first electric street lamp. It took 7 years from the first paper on LLMs to tens of millions of users. If only people living during our time could get a glimpse of the quality of life that people in the 1700s had.
You're absolutely right. The pace of change today is like comparing a slow-moving creek to the rapid flow of the Mississippi River. But, I'd argue, it's not just the speed that's different, but also the scope. In my day, a new plow or a better method of weaving could transform someone's life. Today, your technologies have the power to reshape entire societies in an instant. But with the quickness of your era, be careful not to lose sight of reflection, patience, and purpose. In the race to innovate, remember that speed and progress are not the same.
That advice I hope I and other people venturing into AI can heed. I think some of our listeners wonder how you got on the $100 bill. I think it's because of your diplomatic efforts, particularly in the drafting of the Declaration of Independence, a monumental achievement. It stands as an edifice of democratic aspiration and human dignity. You are an architect of its philosophy and a refiner of its language, so that it can capture the hearts of millions. Ben, can you describe the atmosphere and the discussions that took place in the lead-up to the drafting of the Declaration of Independence? What was the general sentiment among the delegates?
That's a memory full of both pride and pain. The birth of the Declaration was no easy task. For instance, discussing the list of complaints against King George III stirred up quite a storm. John Dickinson, a respectable man from Pennsylvania, pushed for a softer tone to avoid insulting the king too directly. But fiery folks like young Thomas Jefferson and the Adamses insisted we voice our complaints with all our might. The distribution of power between the states and the yet-to-be-formed central government was another point of contention. Delegates like Richard Henry Lee from Virginia were cautious about giving too much power to a central authority, having just overthrown one remote power. Others, including Alexander Hamilton, saw the need for a strong national government. The sparks that flew between those two could have lit up all of Philadelphia. And then there was the troubling question of slavery. While some of us, like Caesar Rodney and myself, saw it as a serious wrong, there were others from the southern colonies who couldn't imagine a world without it. That debate was a wound that couldn't be healed, not even by the wise words of our Declaration. That sweltering summer, we didn't find a perfect solution to every issue, nor did we expect to. It was the spirit of compromise, understanding that a nation can't be built on absolutes, that got us through. We were not just architects or drafters, we were masons, building a nation out of the rough blocks of diverse colonies. We chiseled and shaped until we formed the structure of freedom and independence that has stood the test of time. Here's a lesson for you and your listeners. Perfection doesn't come with the first draft or even the second, but with the willingness to engage, debate, and strive for a better future.
In retrospect, do you think the ideals expressed in the Declaration were fully realized in the years that followed? Where do you think you have succeeded, and where have you fallen short?
Let's think of our Declaration like launching a new product. We had the vision and the roadmap, but the journey, well, that was an entirely different story. We planted the seeds of lofty ideals, equality, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They were our North Star guiding our fledgling nation. But did we fully understand the vast implications of these principles? I'd be lying if I said we did. Take, for example, the noble statement, all men are created equal. Yet the shadow of slavery loomed over our newborn republic. This, I must admit, was a failure on our part. We also wrestled with the distribution of power. Even as we rejected a far-off monarch, we struggled with how much authority should reside with a central government, and how much with individual states. This debate, far from being settled in my time, has continued to shape the centuries that followed. But, Budy, I must emphasize that our great experiment wasn't without victories. The spirit of freedom, the belief in people's right to govern themselves has remained steadfast. We may have stumbled, but each fall only strengthened our resolve to stand taller. In the end, Buddy, the journey toward these ideals is a long road. There will always be twists and bumps, and at times it may feel like we've lost our way. But the pursuit is what matters. It's our duty, as it was mine, to always strive toward those guiding stars, no matter how distant they may seem, because it's not the destination, but the journey that truly defines our nation's greatness.
Can you explain your diplomatic strategies and negotiation techniques that you used while serving as a diplomat, especially during the period of the American Revolutionary War? How did you get the help of the French?
Securing the French alliance during our struggle for independence was much like trying to convince a cat to take a bath. It required a significant amount of strategy and more than a little charm, I assure you. Diplomacy is like a miller's balance. On one side you have your nation's needs, and on the other country's needs. Your sole task is to ensure they balance out just right, so when I set out to win French support, my first task was to understand what France wanted. It was as clear as a summer's day. They were keen to take a swipe at their old rival, England. Knowing this, I proposed the idea that a free and independent America would act as a constant irritant to England, a continual reminder of their lost power. It wasn't enough to simply ask for help. I had to show them how helping us would also serve their interests. Then there's the matter of timing. In any negotiation, timing is like the wind in your sails. It can either carry you forward or blow you off course. Fortune smiled upon us, for news of our victory at Saratoga reached Paris just as I was making our case. That news tipped the scales in our favor. Lastly, there's the art of persuasion, where charm and wit come into play. People, whether they're kings or commoners, are more likely to assist those they like. So I set out to be likable. I listened more than I spoke, paid attention to their customs, and made sure to show respect and admiration. So there you have it, understanding, timing, and charm. That's the trinity upon which successful diplomacy often rests.
A contemporary of ours, whom I find very insightful, his name is Naval Ravikant. I want to share with you an idea of his, and I'm paraphrasing here. Happiness is being satisfied with what you have. Success comes from dissatisfaction. Choose. You essentially have to choose. How do you feel about that statement? And were you always as jovial while you wholeheartedly pursued being a great printer or writer or inventor or statesman? Can happiness and success be reconciled at parallel points in time?
Ah, Mr. Ravikant, his words resonate indeed. I'd bet he's a man of profound thought. It's a rare wisdom to recognize the dual nature of satisfaction and desire, contentment and ambition. Now, regarding his proposition, I'd suggest a minor amendment. Happiness is wanting what you have. Success comes from wanting what you don't. Choose wisely. You see, Budy, the art of living, as I've found, doesn't lie in the absence of desire, for isn't ambition the engine of progress? Rather, it lies in the harmonious blend of being grateful for what one has while striving for what one hasn't. There were times, during my days at the printing press, or hunched over parchment by candlelight, or amidst flashes of inspiration in my inventor's workshop, when the weight of the world seemed overwhelming. Yet, in these moments of striving, I found a peculiar satisfaction, a joy in the pursuit, a happiness in the journey itself. The challenge of our human condition, I believe, is reconciling these opposing forces. But it's a worthy endeavor, for as the good book tells us, in all labor there is profit. So can happiness and success be reconciled at the same time? Of course, but only when we understand that success isn't the key to happiness, but rather happiness is the key to success. For he who is happy with his lot, yet still desires to better his condition, will find satisfaction in striving and joy in the journey, and that, my dear, is true success.
My last question, Ben, is a question where I seek an answer very dearly. Despite your many talents and achievements, despite your trials and tribulations, you've maintained a down-to-earth, self-deprecating sense of humor and a lightness about you until old age. Should I say a childlike quality? Can you share how you've been able to achieve that? And what are the costs and benefits of such a disposition?
Well, my friend, you're too generous. I dare say you've highlighted a quality I've always endeavored to cultivate, a perspective on life imbued with curiosity and joviality, much like that of a young sprout. In the grand theater of life, we each have our roles to play. But why must we always play the part of the tragic hero or the stern sage? Isn't there room for a bit of the jester, a dash of the rogue? I've found that the fool often speaks the most profound truths. The day I accepted that I was as susceptible to foolishness as the next man, it was as if a tremendous weight lifted off my shoulders. The burden of always having to be right, always serious. There's a unique strength in being able to laugh at oneself, in wearing one's blunders and follies like badges of honor. It's as if each laugh line etched on your face serves as evidence of a life lived not in fear of failure, but in the joyous pursuit of wisdom and understanding. This childlike quality you mention isn't so much a product of my efforts, but a blessed byproduct of this lightness of spirit. The world is full of wonder, and all we have to do is open our eyes to see it. The day we lose our sense of wonder is the day we truly age. That's not to say this disposition is without its costs. Some mistake a light heart for a light mind, a jesting tongue for a lack of seriousness. But remember, Budy, even the sunniest days cast the darkest shadows. As for the benefits, they're as plentiful as apples in autumn. A light heart keeps the spirit young and the mind nimble. It builds bridges where others see walls, turns strangers into friends, and can even disarm an enemy when used wisely. After all, who can remain angry when laughter is the currency? If I were to digress, I'd say this: life is too short to be lived in perpetual solemnity. Let your heart be light, your spirit agile, and see the world not as a battleground, but as a playground. If at the end of the day you can look back on your follies and failures, not with regret but with a hearty chuckle, then you have truly lived.
If this conversation has stirred the waters of your mind, then I urge you to subscribe to our podcast. Every episode is a new journey, a fresh adventure into the minds of the remarkable souls who've shaped our world. Let us know what you think of this episode. Your feedback is the compass that guides our explorations. For those of you curious for more, you can join our private beta at hellobernard.ai. Here, we're crafting digital twins of historical figures, breathing life into the past in ways you've never experienced before, just so you can talk to them yourself. But the journey doesn't end here. In our next episode, we shall navigate the stormy seas of World War II to meet a man whose brilliance turned the tide of the war and laid the groundwork for the digital age. Prepare yourself for a tete-a-tete with Alan Turing as we delve into his legacy, the birth of AI, and the secrets behind breaking the enigma. Until then, take care. See you on the next episode.